Today we are adding and subtracting rational expressions. Just as with rational numbers, in fractional form, to add or subtract two rational expressions that have unlike denominators, you must first find the least common denominator. The least common denominator is the least common multiple of the two denominators. To find the least common multiple of two or more numbers or polynomials, factor them. The least common multiple contains each factor the greatest number of times it appears as a factor. So I've recapped those steps here for adding these expressions. First, we will factor each denominator. So our denominators are 4b and 10. 4 is 2 times 2, and then 10 is 2 times 5. So now we need to move on to step 2 and determine the least common multiple of the denominators. It must contain each factor the most times it occurs. So I have 2 is a factor twice. So the least common multiple has 2 as a factor twice. And then this denominator has the factor of 5 once, and it's 0 times here, so we need 5 as a factor in our least common multiple. And then we have b as a factor. So our least common multiple would be 20b. So now we look at this denominator. Which factors is it missing from the least common? It already has two factors of 2 and it has a factor of b, so it needs the factor of 5. So I'm going to multiply by 5 over 5. And then I look at the next denominator, 2 times 5, and what is it missing to have all of the factors of the least common multiple? It needs another factor of 2 and it needs a factor of b. So I'm going to multiply by 2b over 2b. So our new fractions are 35a over 20b plus 8bc squared over 20b. So now that our denominators are the same, we will keep the denominator and add our numerators. For part B, first we will factor each denominator. So 9 is 3 times 3. 6 is 2 times 3, and then we will determine our least common denominator. So there's 2 factors of 3 in this denominator and 1 factor of 3. So you need it the most times, which is 2, so 3 squared. And then we've got 1 factor of 2, and a factor of y, and a factor of z. So then I'm going to look at the first denominator and look at which factors it's missing so that it would be equal to the least common multiple. So it needs a factor of 2 and a factor of z. So we're going to multiply by 2z over 2z. Then for our second denominator, looking at what it needs, it only has 1 factor of 3, but it needs 2, and then it needs a factor of y. So we're going to multiply by 3y over 3y. So now our denominators are both 18yz. And then we will keep the denominator and add the numerators. For example 2, first step is to factor each denominator. So the first denominator is a quadratic trinomial. The leading coefficient is 1. So to factor it, I'm going to think about what multiplies to negative 15 and adds to 2, which would be positive 5 and minus 3. So that factors into x minus 3, x plus 5. And then there's only 2 terms here. Their greatest common factor is a 5, so I factor out the 5. And then now that both denominators are factored, I'm going to determine the least common multiple of the denominators. So I need the factor of x minus 3 one time, and x plus 5 one time, and 5. So then I look at this current denominator, which of these factors in the least common multiple is it missing? And it would be missing the factor of 5. So I'm going to multiply numerator and denominator by 5. And then for the second denominator, it needs the factor x plus 5. So I'm going to multiply by x plus 5 over x plus 5. So now distributing the 5 to this numerator here, it becomes 10x plus 5. Distributing negative 7, that becomes negative 7x minus 35. So notice here we are subtracting, so I just put the subtraction with the numerator. And now that the denominators are the same, we will keep the denominator and then we'll add our numerators. 10 plus negative 7x, or 10x plus negative 7x is 3x. 5 plus negative 35 is negative 30. For example 3, to simplify this expression, we are going to factor. In this case, our denominators can't be factored, so we're just going to look at our least common multiple would be a factor of x, and then 3x squared plus 20. So for the first part of the expression, we're multiplying by 3x squared plus 20 over 3x squared plus 20. For the second one, we'll multiply numerator and denominator by x. So distributing the 20 here, we'd have 60x squared plus 400 over 3x cubed plus 20x. And then the second one, 200x times x is 200x squared. Distributing the x in the denominator, we have 3x cubed plus 20x. Now we have a common denominator, so we're going to keep the denominator and add the numerators. So we'll combine like terms here. 60x squared plus 200x squared is 260x squared plus 400. This is called a complex fraction, where we have a fraction within a fraction. So when your denominators don't have any common factors, one method for adding them together is, elementary teachers maybe call it the butterfly method. So we multiply the denominators together, that's our common denominator, and then we'll have the product of this diagonal plus the product of this diagonal. So we can do that here. Now the fraction bar, when we're dividing, we'll just think of that as division, and then we're going to simplify the parts that are in parentheses here using this butterfly method. So for the first set of parentheses, our denominator is going to be y, and then I'll take the product of this diagonal, 1 times x, which is x, plus the product of this diagonal, which is y. And then simplifying what we have in parentheses here, multiply your denominators together, xy, this diagonal would be y squared, minus this diagonal, which would be x. Divide means to multiply by the reciprocal. And now that we are multiplying, we multiply the numerator. We can cancel out like factors first, so 1 factor of y cancels out, and then multiplying our numerator. So I'm going to distribute this factor of x to x plus y, and then our denominator is y squared minus x. Another complex fraction, so think of this fraction bar in the middle as dividing, and then we'll simplify what's in parentheses here, simplify what's in parentheses here. So multiply your denominators together, xy, and then the product of this diagonal is x squared plus the product of this diagonal, which would be 2y. And multiply your denominators together, we get 2x. The product of this diagonal is x squared, and then it's subtraction minus the product of this diagonal minus 2y. Divide means to multiply by the reciprocal, so I flip this and change that to a multiply. And then we're going to divide out the factor of x and multiply numerator times numerator. I would distribute the 2, and then in the denominator here, y times this expression, we would distribute the y, and this is our final answer. Thank you for watching.